Welcome back to the Manager's Mic podcast. I have with me today Scott. He's a managing director and principal consultant at Trumpolt Compensation Design Solutions with over 30 years in compensation planning and HR leadership across North America, Europe, APAC. He builds market-based pay structures, sales incentive plans, and career architecture systems that turn pay transparency into practical growth plans. A certified global remuneration professional with an MS in HR. Scott has advised organizations across logistics and aerospace, as well as healthcare, hospitality, and manufacturing. Scott is known for translating black box compensation into manager-ready tools that improve engagement, retention, and performance. Scott, welcome to the Manager's Mic podcast. We're going to talk about money, a very important factor. So is there anything you wanted to add to that before we kind of get into the heart of these questions and for what we're going to deliver today, if that's fair?
Yeah, no, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on your show, and thank you for that introduction. I think that introduction sets us up well to talk about black box issues as it relates to compensation, pay transparency, things of that nature. So I think we should just get into it.
All right, let's do it. So when I was studying your information, and you're pretty awesome professional, and I was looking at some of your clips on other podcasts, just for context, for somebody who may not know what black box compensation is, would you mind peeling the onion around that definition for maybe like a first time people manager or somebody who hears this and goes like, I don't know what that means. Would you be mind just kind of dumbing that down a little? Cause like me personally, like when I heard that, I thought, well, that's cool. But I think for you as the expert, it would be powerful to start setting the stage with that term.
Sure. Well, employee compensation planning and design is part of the human resources function because you're dealing with individuals' lives. You're dealing with human beings, like all different aspects of human resources. But when you think about it, when you come into an organization, some areas of human resources are very transparent. You go through a recruitment process, the new hire process, interaction with managers on performance issues. All of that is very transparent, but compensation, not so much. Oftentimes in past years, when you come into an organization and you read the employee handbook, they'll talk about not discussing your pay with other employees. And it's just very much an individual thing that people are paid differently based on different skills, experiences that they bring to the table. So it's very much, in a few words, it's a hush-hush subject. But
Right.
in more recent years, especially with the up-and-coming generations, they want more transparency to pay issues. This is something that comes out in employee opinion surveys, and companies that want to become employers of choice have to take a hard look at pay transparency. There are different laws that are being implemented in various states where you have to provide pay ranges for job candidates. And how do you navigate those types of issues in a way that does bring more transparency? So that's the black box concept. It's a lack of transparency.
Understood.
So how do you bring compensation out in the open while still respecting the kind of issues that I talked about, that people are paid differently for different skills and abilities, and individuals may be getting data from various sources about their job that may or may not be accurate. Whoever said everything on the internet was accurate. So it makes for a very tense time. And when you think of employee engagement, if employees are tense about whatever it is that's bothering them, the likelihood for them to be engaged, not just showing up for work, that's not employee engagement. Employee engagement is really being motivated to work towards company goals and to understand your place in the business. So anything, whether it's pay or anything else related to a company in an organization, if it is a bit nerve-wracking, if it makes things tense, that reduces the possibilities for employee engagement. And so in my area of compensation, the reason I became a consultant 13 years ago and left the corporate world was not because of a rejection of the corporate world, but it was just that I wanted to focus specifically on how my functional area could improve employee engagement.
Oh, okay. That's intriguing. Why do you feel pay is so unclear and growth plans quietly erode motivation and retention? Why do you feel that's part of the culture based on your 30 years in helping companies, Scott?
Well, pay is unclear because companies just don't put out a lot of information about it. Whether if they are mandated to put out certain information, they only put out that information which is absolutely necessary to do. So it's part of a culture that has just been in existence for a long time, but it's changing now because up and coming generations do want more pay transparency. However, I think what they're really talking about when they're not necessarily employees wanting to know what everybody makes. Maybe they are, but it's not the primary concern. The primary concern is how it's being positioned to employees. They'll talk about, yeah, I want to know more about why I'm getting paid, what I'm getting paid. But what it
Hmm.
really stems from there is this aspect of career development. That's the important piece. And fortunately, it's through career development and having a clear understanding. When an employee has a clear understanding of how they fit in an organization and how they can grow within an organization, that's what makes the difference. Now, certainly an employee understands. They may not understand why they're getting paid what they're getting paid. They may not understand why someone's getting paid differently than them. But what they
Right.
can grab onto is the idea that as they grow in their career, and they begin to understand how their contribution affects the business model. As they do that, they know that their pay is going to grow. So that's the connection. That's the link. If we want to have more pay transparency, we've got to link it directly to career development options.
Hmm. I like that. I'm going to challenge you a little, if I may, Scott. Is there a singular example that comes to mind that resonates? I had this one case, and here's was the challenge, here was the solution to bridge some gaps in this conversation, if that's fair.
One that I always love to bring up is I remember when I was back in the corporate world, and again, it's not just employees, but their managers as well. And that's key. And we can talk about that a little bit later about the
Yeah.
relationship between the employee and the manager. I use this example a lot because it just resonated with me and it's so descriptive of what I saw in the corporate world. A manager comes into me and says, I've lost 3 internal auditors in the past few months and I've lost them over pay. Our pay structures, without them having seen the manager, having seen our pay structures are either out of date or they're not working. So I started to ask the manager some questions. How long were the employees with you? 4 or 5 years. So they've been well entrenched in the organization. And were they good performers? Oh yeah, absolutely good performers. That's why I'm here talking to you because I've lost some really good performers. And I said, do you happen to know, maybe in the exit interviews, why they left the organization? They mentioned it was about pay. Oh, okay. Tell me, what were they making when they left the organization here? Because I didn't know the names off the top. He didn't share the names.
Right. Of course.
Um, they were making, I think, around the low 80s, 81, 82 $1,000. And I says,
Hmm.
okay. And so I started to look up the employees and I considered the amount of experience that they had and that they were good performers. And then I said to the manager, well, what did they leave for? Did you know what they kind of left for? Yeah, they left for around $90,000 a year. Okay, about
Hmm.
$9,000 shy. Well, guess what? That's our midpoint. That's our competitive midpoint where those individuals should be paid. What I'm saying here
Hmm.
is there was nothing wrong with our ranges. Our ranges were perfectly up to date. They were paying 90,000. But the big question I had for the manager was why if these employees have been around for 4 years or 5 years and are good employees, why are they making at the low end of the scale instead of at the midpoint? So then it becomes
Hmm.
a discussion not about the pay ranges not working, but the manager needs to take a more proactive role when good performance comes around, not to just give them a standard merit increase, but to grow their pay, to retain them. It's not going to
Okay.
engage them, but to retain them by paying them near the market. Now, it's not all the manager's fault, because
Right.
human resources has to play a role in proactively. Human resources is always concerned that their reputation is one, that they're not really a business partner. They're not a profit center. So the human resources needs to find ways to strengthen their partnership with management. And one way to do that is to provide guidance and support so that the managers understand when these issues occur proactively, to help notify them that this is an issue. Hey, you've got these top performers here who have been here a while. They're still being paid below market. So if those two elements, human resources and management, work together, it can solve this problem. The manager on the outside is thinking that it's a pay structure issue, but it's not a pay structure issue. So that's a favorite example.
I think it's interesting because I think you're touching on this, and I'm curious to peel this on you further, and how you said how managers need to have more open conversations about having confident pay conversations and build credibility instead of tension. How do you go, if I may, about coaching a manager to do these conversations more effectively? Because I think a pain point, and I'll give you an example. I saw an example once where a manager texted an emoji, like a GIF, like where you get it on your phone. It's like a moving image of someone just like throwing money out.
Mhm.
And I thought that was extremely unprofessional. How do you feel in your 30 years of experience, Scott, managers can have these conversations better instead of making them tension driven conversations with their staff and team members?
Well, they have to do two things. They have to take a situation as to what is happening now with the employee. Say they're sitting down with the individual employee. They have to talk about what has happened now. And I'll give you a perfect example. The manager has a meeting. Oftentimes, the only time that a manager will have a direct meeting with an employee is during their annual performance review. Not that they won't meet, they'll meet with their employees many times, but it's always about work issues.
Right.
But in terms of compensation, probably the one opportunity during the year in a lot of companies is when they have their performance review. They come in, they discuss, and the manager discusses the employee's performance for that year, and then he will assign them a merit increase, a pay increase. And he has a range of options in terms of what he can provide in terms of a merit increase.
Right.
But let us say in some cases, the merit budget is 3%, and he gives the employee a 2% merit increase, which is acceptable. You can do that. But the employee is thinking, why am I getting less than a standard 3% merit increase?
Yeah,
That,
that's fair.
first of all, can be a situation which disengages the employee. So
Right.
now we come to the discussion part. When the employee asks that question, why
Yeah.
am I only getting 2%? You just graded me as a really good performer in this case. And the manager will say something usually to the effect, well, yes, it's true. You're really a good performer, but I've been advised that you're already getting paid above the market for your
Mhm.
role. And since you're getting paid above the market for your role, we expect you to be a top performer. The employee comes away with a
Mhm.
mixed message. Why should I continue working really hard and being a top performer if I'm only going to get 2%? I understand I'm well paid for my job, but where's the engagement factor? Where's the motivation? Now, what the manager could have said, and which would have been much more effective, is that yes, you got a 2% increase. And yes, you are paid above the market, but you are paid above the market and you are also an excellent performer. That means that you're ready for the next step in terms of a promotion because the factors are all there. You've been here a certain number of years. You're an excellent performer. You are paid above the market for your job. You are ready for the next step in your career. Now, let's have a discussion about what skills you need to grow so that you can continue to grow your pay. For example, this person could be an intermediate level accountant for the company. How do we get them to become a senior level accountant? Because that pays more. And
Right.
that strengthens the link between the employee and the business needs. It's the fact that they're still having the same type of meeting, but you're changing the dynamic from, well, you're already well paid, so you should be happy with the 2% increase, to, you're not exactly saying that, but that's the impression that you're leaving. Whereas if
Correct.
the manager has the tools in the area of career development to say, hey, you're ready for the next step. And maybe right now we don't have that opportunity, but let's look at the skill sets needed. What are our business? Because the manager is certainly going to know the business needs upcoming. They may not be comp experts, they may not be career development experts, but they do know what their department needs next. That is an idea that this person is ready to grow. How do we set them on a career path so that shortly they're going to be getting a promotion and they're going to be growing their pay? And that's
Hmm.
the difference. It's changing the dynamic from pure transactional, short term, to longer term strategic in outcome.
It's actually a really good frame. And unfortunately, I've never had a conversation like that. I've always had to kind of scratch. If I may, before we go a little deeper into all of the task stuff, was there a moment you had, Scott, that you felt the calling to resolve this pain for companies to make these conversations easier to have, to keep turnover low and to help people have better compensation? Was it that you saw this happening a lot and you were more successful at it? I'd like to highlight you into why you felt this calling to do this type of good work.
In my own situation, I was a people leader at one point, and I had a number of different compensation analysts that were reporting into me. Imagine when it came time to merit review time, my employees had access to each other's salary because they needed to on a need to know basis. They were compensation professionals managing compensation issues under my team. They had to
Hmm.
have access to all the data. From that perspective, I had to be very fair and very careful, and I had to evaluate each of my employees, not just based on what they're doing, but where they were in their growth and development, what their potential was, and to, with a limited budget, assign increases properly. I was forced by my special role, given that I had people that were actually as transparent as I was to everybody's compensation in the organization. So it forced me. The other piece of it, though, came later. When I was still in the corporate world, I became very interested as an analyst in understanding these companies you hear about that are getting awards for being top companies to work for. What is it about them that allows them to be a top company to work for? And what I found was that these companies scored high in employee opinion surveys in the area of employee engagement. I started to make the connection between how can my work, which is very black box, going back to that original question
Correct. Yeah.
we posed, and make it more transparent and therefore become more of an employee engagement factor than something that's hidden, but to do it in a way that was proper. That became really a catalyst for why I became an independent consultant, because I wanted to focus both on what I had learned in the corporate world about how to manage pay for employees and being as transparent as possible, but then taking it to the next step. How can I help companies in this specific area rather than just giving them the meat and potatoes? Here's your pay structure. Here's your career architecture. Here's where a person gets classified within that pay structure, but to actually give them tools, particularly managers,
Yeah.
not human resources, but managers, because managers are the ones, when we talk about employee engagement, they have the most impact, and
Yeah.
employees want to have that one-on-one communication. They're more likely to have it with their managers than human resources, who they may view as the police or a threat to them in some aspects of their career. HR, don't get me wrong, I was in HR. I'm in HR. It has a role to play. But I think the role is better served supporting management members in areas of compensation and career development, as well as other aspects. Think about it. Human resources spends a lot of their time coaching managers on how to do performance reviews, how to handle different compliance issues,
Right.
performance management issues, but not very much on the things that drive employee engagement, such as career development,
Yeah.
pay, other aspects of total rewards. That was really the impetus for why I became an independent consultant, because I wanted to develop solutions, but I wanted to develop them in mind of something bigger that
Yeah.
could strategically link me to the business mission. Because if you have higher employee engagement levels, you typically have higher business results, better business results. And so,
Yeah.
since human resources is not always considered a business partner, this is a way for us to get in the door.
I'm curious about your book. Is there a particular chapter or a piece in the book that you would recommend a reader to go to who can start building that playbook to be better in this area? That you would recommend since you're a
Well,
published
understand
author of
that the
that
book
book.
has a broader scope. It is not about compensation issues per se. It's about being an independent consultant, and it's
Understood.
about really taking your past and refining it and bringing it forward in a way that you're benefiting. You're not starting from ground zero. You're benefiting from all of the experiences that you've had, but you have to go through this fragmentation or defragmentation process where you
Mm,
only pull from there, because you're going to oftentimes be a team of one. You have to work
yeah.
faster and more efficient in all aspects, because you're going to be doing all aspects, not just the work, but all the back office work, promoting yourself. All of these different aspects are going to come into play. So you have to do it in a very streamlined, quick, and effective fashion if you're going to be an individual sole proprietor, such as myself. So that theme runs through the whole book. And within that, I don't think there's one particular chapter that it's a cumulative thing that you see throughout the book. It obviously it covers some of the different things. If there was one chapter, I think, though, to put me on the spot, I would say it would be asking yourself 12 specific questions before you start down this
Mhm.
path. And the answer to those questions may very well help determine if you're going to be successful or not up front. And I didn't really ask all those questions. I just went and did it. But in retrospective, I think the reason why I've been able to be on my own and do well for the past 13 years was these questions that
Mhm.
I had to come up with after the fact. After about 5 years of doing it in the business, I learned what worked and what didn't. I think the reader can see how they answer personally these 12 questions may be, because it's really geared towards people that work in organizations and corporate offices to have the strength and the confidence to make that leap and become an individual consultant, independent consultant. I
Mhm.
think that would be probably one of the most valuable chapters.
Yeah.
That's specifically that chapter about the 12 questions you need to honestly ask yourself is going to help make the decision, not only whether or not you should become an independent consultant, but what your long-term success. And they're very specific questions. They're not very broad and vague. They're very specific, and it can be applied to any area that you might be an independent consultant. Like, I subconsciously knew I was ready, but you never really, when you jump into something like that, it's a totally different
Yeah.
environment. Literally, you're making every single decision. There are some outside support and things like that, but really the buck really stops with you, and it's just a different experience rather than being one of many in an organization. It's just a very different dynamic. And it was
Mhm.
only after working for 5 years, how my brain works anyways, that I was able to create these questions down to and boil them down to their essence, to why I think I was able to survive and thrive in this business.
Mhm.
And I think if you can honestly answer these ones, again, it helps you not only to make that decision, but also then what's your longevity? Because I think a lot of people do go into being an independent consultant as maybe something they want to do for the rest of their life. They don't want to go back to the corporate world. They want to move
Yeah.
forward, but they got to have the right tools, the right attitude, and the right value proposition to make it for the long term. And that's what this helps with.
I like that. I think it's interesting because so many times when I'm in the workplace and I see there's always this divide between managers and HR. What are some small structural changes that can turn performance reviews? We've peeled this a little further. Is it on the responsibility more of HR to coach the manager on how does clarity and consistency in pay systems free them up more to focus on developing their staff rather than being on defensive? Or do you think it's more on the people manager to take some onus or ownership, I mean, of this developmental skill? Because it is a skill. There's probably a little bit in the middle, but where do you think the pendulum swings the most in your professional experience?
Well, my feeling is one, the onus is on two people, and actually the manager would be number three. But the
Really?
first two would be human resources for the reasons that I mentioned earlier about they want to become a strategic partner to management. Here is your opportunity to do that because this is an area that is not as transparent, that not only for the employee, but the manager as well. They need to arm the tool. They need to be proactive and arm the managers with the tools. And when the managers have those tools, they can change the dynamic. They cannot have the conversation that I outlined to you without those tools. Yes, the onus is on HR, but it's also not so much on the manager, but on the employee. The
Mm,
employee can't sit back and let manager figure out, and this is part of the distance, part of the disconnect, is
mm,
that the employee may be thinking that the manager is responsible for their career development. They need to meet
mm.
the manager halfway. Ultimately, when they talk about employee engagement, employees want to know where they fit
Right.
in the grand scheme of things. It's up
Sure.
to the employee also to ask some questions and to say where they want to go in the organization. To me, the manager is certainly a key part of it, but they're number three in the order. I would say HR needs to do their part, and then the employee also needs to meet management halfway in terms of asking questions to get the answers out of managers that they need. Maybe the first time they go into the manager, they don't get the answers that they need, but the manager will be cognizant that these are some concerns of the employee and they can go to human resources. But again, human resources more often than not needs to be proactive and armed with the tools and change that dynamic from purely a transactional compensate. That's the problem, is that the reason why it causes one of the areas, at least when it regards to pay, that you see this disconnect that you talked about
Yeah.
between managers and employees is the fact that it's very icy. It's transactional, it's very to the point, and it's strictly about numbers. There's none of this broader strategic career development aspect that feeds into the conversation that changes how they talk to one another. And
Mm,
by bringing in the career development aspect, layering on top of compensation, not to disguise compensation, but to give meaning as to why things are done the way they are. It's done based on the value of your job and where your value can be in a few years. It needs to be more forward thinking. The onus starts with human resources. It also starts with the employee. But in the meantime, the manager is getting guidance back from the human resources. That's the best way I can explain it.
Is there a framework or a couple of, let's be on the side of the people manager or manager in the context of this conversation for a moment,
Hmm.
Scott? Is there a framework or maybe 1 to 3 questions that is on the responsibility of that staff owner or the employee, I mean, that until you answer this 1 to 3 questions or spend time in this framework, you are not ready to have this conversation? Because if you do, it's a shotgun approach versus a rifle approach analogy. Anything thoughts there on the side of the manager and helping the employee to take some due diligence, answering key questions before they even bring it up?
So you're talking about, yes, in defense of the manager, but what does the employee need to do?
Yeah, if we role play it out,
Yeah.
let's just say I'm
Yeah.
your
There's
employee.
one
You
big
can
one.
go ahead, please do.
There's one big one. That employee is sitting in department meetings with their manager at various times, and the manager is describing the goals and objectives, or at least the day-to-day work, updates, progress updates, meetings they have. The employee needs to take that as an opportunity to be an active listener and understand what the mission of their particular department is based upon everything they're taking in. What is their key function? Really boil it down to what is the role of my department in this organization? And then from that, going back and looking at their own skills, seeing what other people do in that same department, maybe at a higher level than them,
Mhm.
and being introspective enough to say, okay, these are the type of jobs we have in our department. These are the type of tasks in our department. I am doing this specific task right now based on everything that I'm taking in. When I go to my manager, I should be able, based on all these meetings and just learning about the company, forget about the big picture for the moment of what the company's doing as a whole, but
Right.
just your own department. In your own view as an employee, this is what I did when I was an individual contributor. How can I contribute to this department function in a greater capacity? Then with that in mind, you go in and then identify, okay, I know that this individual over here in our department does this. I don't have this skill, but I'd like to do that. I'd like to learn. I imagine probably that job pays more because it's at a higher level. I think it's being an active listener, really understanding what your department does, and then seeing what other people in that department do. Then if you're interested, if you're not interested, then maybe you're never going to be engaged and maybe you ought to look for a different job or in a different department. And then it expands from there. Companies have many different departments where your skills are transferable. Maybe you might see a different area of the company that you're interested in. Go into your manager with an idea, an understanding of your own department or other departments, what you are interested in doing based upon what's already in existence at the company. Don't do pie in the sky. Where is that next step for me in the organization? That's the education they need to do on their own by being an active listener and then coming in with a framework that helps the manager then, okay, I can work with this. And here's more of what this does because the manager is managing other people and he knows what they're doing. The employee may
Right.
not know, but they're picking up little bits and pieces and then the manager can fill in the rest. That's the way to do it, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's very
And I've
powerful.
seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I had, for example, an individual on my staff. She came into my group. She was in benefits,
Hmm.
not compensation, but she was very detail oriented. She wanted to learn compensation. I took her on and I developed her, and she grew a lot without my development, anyways, because she was a quick learner and she had a great interest. And she became a compensation professional.
Hmm.
Flash forward about 15 years later, she's now head of human resources at that same company.
Oh, wow.
There's an example of someone that was working in a different department, came into one department, learned something. Now they had compensation and benefits. Maybe after I left, they moved in and they did recruiting for a while. I'm not sure. But all I know is 15 years later, they're head of human resources and apparently a very good one. That's an example of what I'm talking about.
How did you spot her potential? Do you typically, when you work with people, Scott, or you had employees, or when you're working with your customers, do you give everyone an A, or did you see something in her that you said she's a leader? I'm just curious and how your perspective works, and when you're leveling people up.
Well, I didn't see her as a leader at that time because she had only been in individual contributor roles. But what I did
Hmm.
know was that she had been highly successful as an individual contributor in the benefits area. And although
Hmm.
benefits is very different than compensation, you still need to be detail oriented.
Yeah.
Her manager spoke very highly of her, and I respected that manager because I'd worked with them. They were the head of benefits, so I knew them. And so
Okay.
it was a very easy decision to make because a lot of her skills, she didn't know the compensation lingo, but I knew she'd pick it up because of her track record at the company. And I was willing to give that a chance because again, it had that internal connection, but more than that, they had been very successful in an area related to what she was going to be doing now.
Nice. I like that. Where can people find you?
My website is www.hrcompensationconsulting.com. It's got a lot of great information about the work I do, the clients I've had, client testimonials. There's also videos I put out there and articles and a link from my book. It's got a wealth of information, and people can contact me there directly, and I'll get an email. And also, I have a strong presence on LinkedIn. I'm also a member of the Better Business Bureau of Southeast U.S. and Florida. And there's different avenues that I can be reached out to, but I would say the website would be the best place.
I saw you were, I think, an A++ on the Better Business Bureau. It's pretty impressive.
Well, A plus. I don't know about A plus
A+.
plus. Yeah.
I gave you the extra plus.
Yes. Thank you very much. Well, that just means that I've been with them for quite some time and I haven't had any negative client reactions. And maybe they also
Okay.
put that there because of the reviews online of
Nice.
my work. And that's the best judge, I think. I mean, to me, I always say that the reward for doing a good job is the opportunity to keep doing it,
Oh,
because
I like that.
I love what I do. And so if I do a good job, that's going to increase the opportunity that I'm going to have to do more. When you become an independent consultant, your work life and your personal life, it's kind of merges. I'm not saying that all I do is work, but what I am saying is that it all becomes, I mean, you are your brand.
Any customers that you can speak to on a high level, you don't have to give names, that you've worked with in the past couple of years that you've been able to do some pretty powerful turnaround, that if people reach out, they call you, they email you, they can make that a goal in working with you. Any particular case study you'd like to speak to there, Scott?
I had one customer, and again, some of my customers find work for me in one area, and then when I'm done with that, they continue to have me. So my engagements can sometimes, I've had some clients last 10 years, or more. Some come in just for a specific project. I'm not saying they all have to sign up with me, and I
Yeah.
don't work on contracts. It's just a matter of if they need me for something. But some of them I've had longer term relationships with, and one of them originally had scored low in the area of compensation on their employee opinion survey. And a few years later, when we had instituted a bunch of new projects, we had moved the needle significantly.
Awesome.
That is something measurable. And that's something that to me is like gold. That's better than getting a trophy. That's better than getting a bonus. That's better than anything. That doesn't happen every day, because sometimes you do a project and you see the results of that, but it may take some time before you get any kind of feedback, or you might not get feedback at all. It's just that,
Yeah.
they were happy with the project. It's over and done with. They're implementing it, but they may not get back to you. Clients tend to let you know when things are not working out so well, but not so much when it's working out well. That's why you have to wait for the whole life cycle to develop. And there are sometimes clients that have a very hard and different view about compensation than I might have. You have to work through that differences and find common ground. But that's just one success story. But again, I look at things in the cumulative. I always look at how many clients I've had over the years, and more importantly, the type of projects that I've worked on and what feedback has been received. That's the most important thing to me. But having done this
Correct.
now for 13 years, I get the feeling that I'm probably good for another few years.
Well, I wish you were my boss at one point. The way you spoke about money and transparency was very clear and powerful. Well, I wish I had a conversation like that early on in my career. You're definitely a professional. I
Well, I was
recommend,
thank you. And I was very
yeah.
fortunate, very early in my career, very fortunate, because I had two mentors that had 25, 30 years of experience like I have now, working in corporate. And working there for 4 years, I really feel like I got 8 or 9 years of experience, because they were constantly exposing me to new things. I was very
Yeah.
lucky. People talk about mentors, having a mentor. I had two, and
Nice.
every day, who were interested in me, I mean, it's the reason I went to a small college to get, originally for my undergrad, to get that individual attention, small groups, things like that. That's where I function best.
Yeah.
Having those kind of mentors really created a personalized environment for me, and that just helped me to continue on doing what I was doing.